Hello and welcome to Preemie Chat, a space where we connect, learn, and share stories about the world of prematurity. I'm Fabiana Bacchini. I'm a proud preemie parent and executive director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, or CPBF, and I'm very honored to have you joining us here today. Preemie Chat is brought to you by CPBF, a parent-led charitable organization dedicated to supporting families, advocating for the needs of premature babies, and providing the latest information and resources to help parents and caregivers navigate this journey. Whether you're a parent, a healthcare professional, researcher, or someone interested in understanding more about preterm birth, you are in the right place. Together, we are building a supportive community where stories are shared, questions are answered, new evidence is explored, and no one feels alone. Be sure to visit our website at canadianpreemies.org, where you find helpful resources, our latest projects, and most importantly, a community of people who wants to see our little babies thrive. If you're watching live today, join the conversation. Share your questions and comments in the chat, and we address them during our program. If you're watching a recorded session, you can still connect with us through our website. And it is through meaningful conversations like this one that we can advance practice and learn together. So let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And this is special Preemie Chat today. We have 4 incredible speakers. It is in honor of World Breastfeeding Week. Today, we join a global conversation around this year's important theme: protect and promote breastfeeding for the best start in life. For families with babies in the NICU, breastfeeding or providing human milk can be a deeply emotional, often complex journey. It is a decision filled with hope, love, and resilience. But it's not a journey parents should have to walk alone. Together, we can help ensure every parent who wants to breastfeed their preterm or sick baby is empowered, informed, and fully supported. Because human milk is not only food, it is medicine, comfort, and connection. It is our duty as a parent organization to promote and support breastfeeding or chest feeding so every baby, no matter how small, gets the best start in life. So thank you for being here today, and let's begin. Today we have, as I mentioned, 4 amazing speakers, and our very first speaker is Dr. Prakeshkumar Shah. And Dr. Prakeshkumar Shah is going to talk about the importance of mother's own milk in the NICU. In this session, he will present findings on their recently published paper comparing neurodevelopmental outcomes of preterm neonates in relation of intake of mother's own milk, donor milk, and formula milk. He will highlight the importance of mother's own milk feeding during the NICU stay. And I have here joining us live, let me bring him to the screen, Dr. Prakeshkumar Shah, who is joining from Toronto. He's the Chief of Pediatrics and Professor in the Department of Pediatrics and Institute of Health Policy, Management and Evaluation at the University of Toronto in Canada. He's the director of the Canadian Neonatal Network, as known as CNN, and an international network for evaluation of outcomes of neonates, the INEO, where he oversees a project of benchmarking outcomes of very low birth weight neonates in 11 countries, with a final aim of improving quality of care to neonates and families worldwide. Dr. Shah, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I know you have a presentation to share with us, and to all of you joining us live, please send your questions and we will address them after Dr. Shah's presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Fabiana. And thank you very much for those who are listening to this session. I am here to tell you a little bit about the recent research, but more or less about what importance of mother's own milk. And it cannot be at the right time except for this, other than this breastfeeding week Preemie Chat. So my idea is to review feeding pattern in extremely preterm neonates when they are in NICU, understand some differences in outcomes between mother's own milk and donor milk and formula, if possible, and what can be done to improve the outcomes. So I'm not here to tell what everybody should be doing. So I'll be showing you a few slides with some pictures and just talk about it so that later on I can get some questions. So it's first of all, we need to delineate what is really happening to these babies when they are extremely premature, as you can see on the bottom axis, 23 week, 24 week to 37 weeks, and what kind of milk these babies are getting. And what you see in this study from one center, recently published, the green line is the maternal mother's own milk. The purple line is the donor milk. The red line is formula. And as you can see in the initial days, in the first few days, there may be some mother's milk, but as the volume required by the baby starts to increase, that donor milk contribution, first of all, in the first week is very high, but then slowly goes down because mother's own milk starts to come. So understanding this pattern is what is really happening is very important for us to know that, okay, what can we do? How can we make the green line as big as possible or as nearer to the top as possible, and all the other lines towards the bottom of the graph? And because this is not an issue for the distribution that you saw, it's being reported from many countries as well. This is the data from the UK, which is basically showing that percentage of the babies who received mother's own milk on day 1 and 2 is here. So in day 1 and 2, maximum is somewhere between 30 to 40% of the milk babies receives any mother's own milk. When this goes to the type of feeding on day 14, what you see is exclusive mother's own milk, around 50%, 60%, 50%, less than 50%. This is by day 14. And by the end of the journey, when they are ready to go home or being transferred kind of thing, you can see the mother's own milk proportion is significantly lower as the gestation is lower, whereas the mixed feeding, which is the mother's own milk plus formula, is higher when they are ready to go home. This is in the first 12 weeks of life. So again, data from the US, which is basically showing that in extremely preterm, there is a high proportion of the mothers who initiate. By 12 week, continue is around 70%. And how much of it is being given to the baby is around 50 to 60%. And that goes down as the gestation advances. Again, interaction. And how does this interact with the donor milk? So this is an interesting data, again, from the US, to look at their units distribution of milk that babies were receiving in the pre-donor human milk. So before they started having donor human milk bank, and in the post-donor. So bottom ones are the post, and the top ones are the pre. The first left is the first 14 days. Second on the right is 15 to 28 days. And as you can see, As the donor milk was available in their unit, the orange line started to creep on. What worried me about this slide is that in the pre-era, there was a lot of blue. In the post-era, the blue part is a little bit narrow and overlapped by the orange and the green part, meaning thereby there was some replacement of mother's own milk with the donor human milk. So, is there a difference? I mean, are there any difference between the two? Yes, because we store, process the donor milk. It also depends on the donor's lactation stage. Many nutritional, immunologic, microbiology components are either reduced or eliminated in donor human milk. So some of the protection against prematurity related complications when they are fed high amount of donor milk are not as much as if it was from the mother's own milk. And they call for more studies to be done in this area. So there was one previous study done from a single center which looked at the impact of enteral nutrition on clinical outcomes. And as what is on the y-axis is duration of respiratory support. You can see the babies who exclusively were human milk fed, 200 versus 250 or 200 when it was a mixed or formula milk. So you could see clearly the importance of mother's own milk, even for an outcome which is quite different than what we would have thought, like respiratory outcome. And there is a difference between the preterm newborns fed mother's own milk and donor milk when you look at their immunological profile as they advance, become bigger, mature, and become children. And this study has multiple infographics that you can see. But what it's showing is that infants at 22 weeks to 24 weeks show slower immune development. Now, mother milk exposure profile changes towards the immunological profile of a full-term infant. So it does contain benefits such as bioactive molecules and not only microbiome, but development of immune system. And that may be the one that we are seeing that is responsible for reducing infection. Finally, this is our study that Fabiana was mentioning. So we looked at how much of the feed type during their stay they received. And we compared whether there was a one more day of mother's milk versus donor milk, or mother's milk versus baby being kept nil by mouth, or mother's milk versus formula. And what we found is that there is significant 3-point reduction in cognitive score, like 0.3 reduction in a cognitive score, 0.2 reduction in a language score, and 0.5 point reduction per 1 day reallocation of to mother's own milk as compared to donor's milk. Highlighted more here, what you can, if you convert it, the probability of cognitive score less than 85 increases by 2.8% per day of mother's milk being replaced by donor milk. So this is very strong and compelling information that basically tells us that donor milk, even donor milk, which is better than formula, 100%, no doubt. That's not what I'm here to tell you. But I'm saying that donor milk in place of mother milk is associated with not so great cognitive and neurodevelopmental outcome. Now, as if this is completely easy, as Fabiana said, there are a lot of things that happens during the baby's, from baby's birth to mother's giving mother's milk or pumping donor's milk, etc., etc. There are a lot. It's a complex interaction, and I'm not here to tell that okay, no, everybody should drop everything else and just do this, or telling that or pushing the boundaries, but because it's a complex interaction. But how can, as an organization, as healthcare workers, we can support mothers to provide her own milk to the baby, and that individual hospital needs to work on, as well as get some information as to what is happening in their unit. What can we do? I mean, there are a lot of people working in this area. And one of the things that recently was suggested is replacement, like introduction of milk microbiome. So recolonizing donor milk with mother's own milk microbiome And they were able to show that there is possibility that we can replace the mother's own microbiome into the donor's milk, and maybe there may be better effect. But this is all experimental. As you saw, it was all test tubes. So in conclusion, mother's own milk is better than donor human milk, which is far better than formula when it comes to preterm neonate. There is complex psychosocial, medical, family dynamics that play a role in mother's ability to provide and produce adequate amount of milk, and how can we support it. Any effort for quality improvement in supporting or helping these mothers to produce adequate milk, or what their baby or babies need, are essential. Thank you very much. I hope I was in my time.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. Very enlightening. I was very excited actually when I read this paper, because we all know the benefits of mother's own milk to the preterm babies. And I feel as a system that what else can you do? We know the barriers, right? We know the socioeconomic factors that impact a mom's pumping and providing breast milk. But as a system, because in Canada we have our network, all 31 NICU, level 3 NICUs work together. What are we not doing that we could be doing to improve that? But also my question to you is, when babies get transferred from a level 3 to a level 2 NICU, there is also a rush to get that baby out of the unit. And then, okay, what else can we do? Can we provide other supplements so baby can go home faster? So I just want to hear your insights and your the work that you've been doing to really continue to empower parents and change the cultures of some units to really promote more breastfeeding.
Yeah, I think the short answer is anything that we can do. I think every unit will have to look at their own numbers, own data, own population, because everybody caters different population. Because I didn't go much into detail is about, there is also racial, ethnic, where you live, rural areas, urban area. There are social support that you have, who is at home, who is supporting you. There are complex interaction between that. So I think it will be important that we get into details with the families and the parents when they are admitted into, say, what is their understanding, what is their knowledge, what is their attitude, belief, practices, and how can we support what they are doing. It's very stressful to have a baby at 23 week, 24 week, 25 weeks, looking the baby in the NICU where you have never seen a small baby in your entire life, and then have a pressure that, oh, I have to do something. Many times I have found that many parents, just because of the stress, oh, I have to do, the milk supply goes down. Right. So the important thing is to tell them, just do what you can. But these are the things we know that have helped other parents, in case some of them would help you, kind of thing. I think it's as well as within the organization, all whatever support you can provide to start pumping as soon as possible, to provide the pumping kits, provide the pumping support, lactation support, going and making sure that they are doing, as well as within institute when the parents are staying with the baby for a longer period, opportunities as well as availability of places where it can be facilitated if you don't have a single room.
Absolutely. So there's a question here from Jana. What an interesting study. For the study, cognitive scores were recorded at which time point? Was it later in life? If so, how were confounding factors controlled? Thank you for your question, Jana.
Thank you. Thank you for question. And thank you for the comments. Yes, the cognitive scores were recorded at between 18 to 24 months of age, which is where we follow this baby. We haven't gone beyond the 24 months, but I'm sure if we continue, probably the effect will be even bigger. And we did try to control for as many factors that we know were associated prior to initiation or during the course, including morbidities that babies suffer.
Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Shah, for being here with us today. I really appreciate the time and really giving us some insights on what is happening in this new study. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And our next talk is with Dr. Mariana Gonzalez on breastfeeding preterm babies, redefining priorities. She will highlight the Brazilian POP Mom protocol, a low-cost strategy involving the prolonged oropharyngeal administration of mother's own milk, as known as MOM, to very preterm infants in the NICU. Applied from birth until oral feeding begins, this approach was associated with increased mom use at discharge and improved the health growth without adverse effects. Drawing from Brazil's experience in a high complex neonatal unit without donor milk, the session emphasizes how early and sustained mom exposure can enhance breastfeeding outcomes and inform global NICU practices. And I have here joining us live from Brazil today, my fellow Brazilian friend, Dr. Mariana Gonzalez, who is a professor of neonatal medicine at the Federal University of Health Science of Porto Alegre and a neonatal consultant at Hospital Moinhos de Vento. Her research interests include neonatal nutrition, human milk, and breastfeeding in preterm infants. She coordinates the university extension program Science for Mothers and hosts the Portuguese version of the Incubator podcast. She's also involved in incorporating digital media and science communication into medical teaching. Mariana, thank you so much for joining us here today. What a pleasure to bring a Brazilian to expand our horizons around the world. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Fabiana, for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us virtually today. I'd like to start by thanking you again, Fabiana, and the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation for this invitation and for hosting such a meaningful conversation. It's an honor to share my experiences with professionals from around the world who care deeply about improving outcomes for preterm babies. My name is Mariana. I'm a neonatal medicine professor at UFSPA, we call it here, and a neonatal intensivist at Hospital Moinhos de Vento in Porto Alegre. Today, I'll be talking to you about breastfeeding support for preterm infants in the NICU with a focus on redefining priorities, not just through evidence, but through culture, systems, and practices. So just let me begin by offering a bit of context about where I come from and why this topic is so personal and pressing for me. Brazil is among the 10 countries with the highest numbers of preterm births in the world. About 1 in every 10 babies here is born prematurely. While this mirrors global averages in a country as large and socioeconomically diverse as Brazil, these numbers present unique challenges. We're talking about a continental country with vast differences in healthcare access, resources, and support structures. So strategies that work in one region may not apply seamlessly in another. That reality has deeply shaped how we think about breastfeeding promotion and also neonatal care. I couldn't give a talk about breastfeeding without talking about one area where Brazil has made remarkable progress and which sets us apart globally, it is our national human milk bank network. We currently have the largest network in the world. In Brazil, human milk donation is entirely voluntary and free of charge. It plays an essential role in both clinical care and public health. Beyond supplying pasteurized donor milk to NICUs, Brazilian human milk banks serves as an open access breastfeeding support centers. Any lactating person, regardless of nationality or origin, can walk into an human milk bank and receive counseling and technical support, completely free of charge. This inclusivity and universality set Brazil apart and demonstrate a deep integration of breastfeeding support into public health policy. Furthermore, our National Human Milk Bank network collaborates with countries in Africa, Latin America, and Europe to support milk banking initiatives internationally. This widespread infrastructure is not just about feeding babies, it's about health, equity, and public trust. To better explain what motivated the POP Mom project, I want to describe the two very different clinical environments where I work. At Hospital Moinhos de Vento, a private institution recognized nationally for excellence, I care for high-risk neonates in a beautiful facility surrounded by trees. Occasionally, we have some special visitors at our NICU windows, as you can see in the second photograph. Yet, despite all its strengths, this hospital does not have a human milk bank. Meanwhile, at UFSPA, the Federal University of Health Sciences of Porto Alegre, I teach at the only public university in Brazil that is fully dedicated to health sciences. Our university hospital, Santa Casa de Porto Alegre, does have a human milk bank, and it's a reference center for our state. Working in both settings gave me the chance to see what's possible with and without the direct presence of a milk bank. And it made me reflect deeply on how much can still be done when infrastructure is limited but intention is strong. As professionals in neonatology and mothers and families, we already know the science behind human milk for preterm infants. Building upon this consensus, which will be explored more during this Preemie Chat, we already know mother's own milk or mom offers unmatched protection, reducing NEC, BPD, retinopathy of prematurity, and sepsis risk. It contributes to a healthier cardiovascular profile, supports brain development, as you have seen in the previous talk, and fosters bonding, benefits that last far beyond the NICU stay. But the challenge isn't just understanding these benefits, it's maintaining breastfeeding during prolonged NICU hospitalizations. That's where we chose to focus our attention, not only on starting mom early, but sustaining it throughout the infant stay and transition to oral feedings. Given the unique vulnerability of preterm infants, these benefits are not simply desirable, they are essential. And that's why we began rethinking how to make these outcomes more consistent, even in environments without direct access to human milk banks like our own NICU. Of course, maintaining breastfeeding in the NICU is not easy. On one side, mothers face barriers such as prolonged dependence on pumping, physical exhaustion, financial stress, varying levels of education, and limited family or staff support. On the other side, preterm infants may experience delayed readiness for oral feeding, gastrointestinal immaturity, complications like NEC and BPD, and low initial milk volumes from mothers. These barriers are complex and interconnected, and they demand an ecosystem of support, not just good intentions. All of these factors interact across time, particularly as NICU stays lengthen. Addressing them requires that we establish sustainable support systems from the outset rather than relying solely on individual resilience. So, inspired by this year's WABA framework, we started this a long time ago, but this connects perfectly with this framework. Inform, anchor, engage, and galvanize, we began asking ourselves, how can we, in a NICU without a milk bank, provide sustained support for mom? That's when we became interested in oropharyngeal colostrum therapy. This was back to 2015-16. But we wanted to go further than the typical 3-5 day application window. Given the unique immunological profile of preterm mom, especially in the first 28 days, we asked ourselves a simple but ambitious question. What if we continue this practice until the infant was ready to feed orally? This was the origin of our Pop Mom protocol, prolonged oropharyngeal administration of mother's own milk. It starts when the baby is born and it continues until the baby can transition to oral feedings. So while previous studies have evaluated short-term oropharyngeal colostrum use from 5 to 7 days and found no significant differences in morbidities, mortality, or feeding at discharge, our study took a different approach. We aimed to assess whether prolonged mom administration protocol, administering from birth until oral transition, was associated with increased mom use at discharge, improved head growth, and survival without major morbidities in very preterm infants, those who were born less than 30 weeks. This quasi-experimental study compared an intervention group receiving Pop Mom protocol to a historical control group before we implemented this in the NICU. Infants received PopMom as soon as milk became available, continuing until oral feedings were established. All eligible very preterm infants without contraindications to human milk were included. The primary outcome was any mom at discharge. Secondary outcomes included head circumference below the third percentile at discharge, and preterm-related morbidities such as severe IVH, chronic lung disease, neck sepsis, and PVL. So this is a little bit of what we did. Here's a brief overview for you. From 2013-15 marked our baseline, the period 1, when 201 infants were born. Overall survival was 90%, and 59.5% were extremely preterm infants, very preterm infants, with a survival rate at 85.7%. In early 2016, we began the introduction phase, team training, protocol development, and initial use based on consultant's discretion. We asked the consultant if we could include it in the prescription. In the second semester of 2016, we entered the evaluation phase with 64 infants. Survival rose to 92.1%, and extremely very preterm survival reached 94.5%. It was a good year. And from 2017 to 19, the period 2, the protocol was consolidated. We included 181 infants. Survival was 92.8%. 53.5% were very preterm infants with 89.6% survival. At this point, all infants without oral foods were prescribed oropharyngeal colostrum, prolonged phase. Nowadays, in the current phase, PopMom is maintained through continuous training and data reviews and remain in place even during the COVID pandemics. So this is, here you can see the mom administration in a 22-weeker, 7-day-old. The PopMom occurs during enteral feedings until the baby can be directly breastfed. We start as soon as the mother can provide her own milk. And so what changed after implementing the PopMom protocol? We included 217 infants born at less than 30 weeks gestation, 120 in the historical group control, and 97 in the intervention group who received PopMom from birth until oral transition. Both groups had similar baseline characteristics, with strengthened the association between outcomes and intervention. And among 189 infants who survived to discharge, key results are the following. The proportion of infants receiving any amount of their mother's own milk at discharge, this is meaning going directly to the breastfeeding, rose from 86.2% to 95.4% after the implementation of the PopMom protocol, an increase of nearly 10% despite typical feeding challenges because the populations were very similar between the periods. We also saw a significant drop in insufficient head growth, meaning the head circumference below the third percentile, from 21.5% in the control group to 10.3% in the intervention group, 53% reduction. Since head circumference is a known proxy for brain development, this finding is especially meaningful. Importantly, no complications related to PopMom were observed, reinforcing its safety even in highly vulnerable infants. And taken together, these results suggest that a simple, low-cost, family-centered intervention requiring no additional infrastructure can significantly improve both breastfeeding rates and early growth in very preterm infants. Up to this point, we've looked at data, percentages, and outcomes. But to fully understand the impact of PopMom protocol, we need to go beyond numbers. What I'd like to share next is how this protocol changed our NICU culture for families, staff, and the way we care. After implementing the PopMom protocol, we realized our next step wasn't just to apply the protocol, but to share what we learned beyond our NICU. So this is so important to be here today. We felt the responsibility to embedding mom support into education and clinical culture. One example was creating structured visits to our university human milk bank for all the 4-year medical students, helping them connect theory with real-world NICU, not just for term infants, but especially for preterms. At the same time, we made breastfeeding a central topic in undergraduate neonatology, framing it as a clinical and developmental priority, not just a maternal issue. We have instituted weekly breastfeeding-oriented multi-professional rounds to discuss how to best support preterm parents during their NICU stay. We also developed an online course for NICU professionals, now available to a wider audience. It covers strategies to improve breastfeeding rates in different settings, including those without milk banks like ours. Through this, we learned that effective dissemination must be intentional and inclusive, targeting physicians, nurses, students, consultants, administrators, and policymakers. Each one plays a role in creating environments where breastfeeding can succeed. What transforms a NICU isn't just what we measure, is what we feel and witness in relationships among staff, families, and babies. After implementing the Pop Mom protocol, we saw a clear cultural shift. Families felt less helpless. Mothers began reporting greater ease in milk expression and a deeper sense of confidence in their ability to produce milk. This shift wasn't only psychological, it was psychological, physiological, and emotional. Instead of feeling like passive observers in the NICU, they became active participants in the care of their infants. Fathers were involved as well, often administering the colostrum themselves, which strengthened their bond and sense of inclusion. This small intervention changed how our team communicated with families. We stopped talking about liters of milk or pumping targets right away. Instead, we started saying just 2.5 ml of your milk is enough to provide one full day of immune therapy for your baby. That sentence alone reframed the entire experience. It shifted the narrative from pressure and performance to possibility and presence in the NICU. Our team began to change too. Once they witnessed the emotional and developmental power of this practice, team members became more invested in creating opportunities for skin-to-skin care, even when staffing was tight or logistics were complicated. There was a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper appreciation for parental involvement, and a stronger commitment to early humanization strategies. So far, we've looked at what happens inside the NICU, but to create less long-lasting effect and change, we must also act beyond the NICU. Preterm infants and their families face ongoing challenges after discharge, and our support for breastfeeding and bonding must continue as well. That's why we've made it a priority to engage and advocate outside the hospital walls, bringing this conversation to a broader audience and decision makers. We've partnered with NGOs like Prematuridade.com in Brazil, which raises awareness and builds community around neonatal care. We've worked with medical students and young researchers, empowering them to promote breastfeeding across different contexts, rural or urban, public or private, well-resourced or not. And perhaps most importantly, it means building bridges with policymakers and civil society. Because when neonatal professionals speak out based on evidence and compassion, we can shape public policies that value human milk, not as a personal choice, but as a matter of public health, equity, and human rights. Our experience with Pop Mom taught us that change doesn't require perfect conditions. It requires alignment, commitment, and willingness to act even when the system isn't ideal. By taking what we learn at the bedside and translating it into public discourse, advocacy, and education, we can extend the reach of breastfeeding protection to where it's most urgently needed, outside the NICU, in everyday lives of the vulnerable families and their babies. So do you remember the video I showed you of a baby of 22 weeks who were receiving the early days colostrum at the NICU? And after informing, anchoring, and engaging, our final call is to galvanize, to inspire action wherever we are. Pop Mom is proof that of what's possible when a team asks, what can we do with what we have? We have no milk bank, no extra funding, no advanced technology, but we had knowledge, commitment, and a desire to improve care. So we created a simple, low-cost, replicable protocol driven by education, teamwork, and family involvement. It wasn't easy. Changing never is. It took time, training, and trust, and a lot of patience. But the results made it all worthwhile. Let me end with this story. The photo you see here is of the preterm baby who was receiving colostrum in her first week of life. And the next picture, her mother sent us this picture of her first day in school. This is what Pop Mom represents: care that lasts beyond discharge, that impacts families and communities. So wherever you are, whether in a high-tech NICU or a small hospital, ask yourself, what can I do today to help more preterm infants go home still receiving their mother's milk? Sometimes all it takes is one team, one drop, one parent. That's how change begins, and that's how we galvanize at one drop at a time. Thank you very much for listening to me. And I would like, these are my social media. You can find me here. You can contact me. And these are the pictures of my hometown. If you ever come to Brazil, consider coming. We are down south. The city is beautiful, and I can take you to the best views. Thank you very much.
Wow, Mariana, thank you so much for this talk. I don't even know what to say, because work in the circumstance that Brazil works with so limited resources and a broader view, what you accomplish is absolutely outstanding. And congratulations to you and your team for taking this initiative. And I'm sure there were a lot of challenges to implement. So my first question is, what are the challenges that you face when you're implementing this new protocol?
I think that the biggest challenge was to go beyond the resistance of the team, because our nurses, they are like lions, and we started to wanting to give the baby a little bit, a drop of this and drop of that. They haven't learned about it, so we had to teach and train all the team. But once they understood the importance of it, and they started telling us that the first time they were putting the babies to the breast of their mothers, even at very early stages, they wanted to breastfeed. Then they were gained, and then they started, because here is not uncommon to not have enough professionals to work. That's fair. That's our reality, okay? And so everything you do that brings more work to the bedside faces resistance. But in the moment you educate and they see the result of that work, they started doing without questioning. And today they are our best advocates, because when they see the prescription, they go and ask, the colostrum is not prescribed, please do it. And that has really changed our culture.
Amazing. So we have a comment here from Barb. This is amazing. We also use mom for milk drops from birth with full gavage feedings with amazing results similar to yours. Barb, let us know where you are so we can expand.
Connect.
Exactly. So we have another question here from Jenna. Thank you for sharing such an amazing research with us, Dr. Oliveira. I'm wondering if the Poppy Mom protocol reduced challenges with initial breastfeeding. For example, did the babies latch more easily?
Yeah, that's a perception from the team, that the babies latch more easily. It's really difficult to measure that and show that in numbers, but that's a very we all perceived that, and mothers, they talk about that. That baby that I showed you in the picture and the video, she received exclusive mother's own milk for 5 months. And she was a 22-weeker. The mother didn't live in the city. They rented an apartment near the hospital, and she stayed all the time here with her. And I told her, you had a 22-week baby, and she was breastfed longer than many term babies are. And that is absolutely amazing. I am amazed by your effort. And she was like, she didn't even realize what an amazing thing she had done for her baby. And that is very gratifying, and what makes us do that more and more and want to share that more and more.
Absolutely. Well, one thing that I really like about your presentation, I mean, among so many other things, is the family-centered care approach that you had, the increase in skin to skin. So it was really like a full package protocol that came together to make it as a reality. So amazing work.
Yeah, everything is very, very linked to each other. So once we started that, it looked like everything was connecting effortlessly after that. So yeah, that's I'm very proud of the teamwork, and we have those breastfeeding oriented rounds now, and we are improving our breastfeeding rates at discharge for these babies, because if you have a donor milk, which is great for them, but the mother doesn't continue to lactate throughout the NICU stay, the moment they step out the NICU, they don't receive their mom's milk anymore, right? And so if you can work with the mothers for them to continue producing milk, that mother has the chance to breastfeed the baby for a longer time. And that's what we want to do.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for your presentation, for sharing your experience and your insights about what is happening. So thank you. And I hope I see you again very soon.
Thank you.
And our next speaker, we are going to talk about milk as a message, learning the language of human milk. In this talk, Dr. Erin Hamilton Spence explores how human milk functions, not just as a nutrition, but as a dynamic biological communication system. For SIGA to HMOs, learn how milk delivers instructions for immunity, tolerance, and growth, and why recognizing its messages can transform neonatal care, clinical policy, and parental empowerment. And I have here joining us live from US, Dr. Hamilton Spence, who is a neonatologist and the Director of Clinical Education and Professional Development at Prolacta Bioscience, where she helps bridge the lived experience of NICU families with the clinical priorities of healthcare teams. Throughout her clinical career, Erin has led efforts to expand access to human milk, improve milk handling and nutrition quality system, and advanced education for both clinicians and families. Erin's first child was unexpectedly admitted to the NICU while she was a medical student. That moment of profound vulnerability shaped her lifelong commitment to improving NICU care and honoring the role of families in it, especially through human milk. Dr. Hamilton Spence, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Fabiana. And thank you to the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. I almost said Breastfeeding Foundation. I guess that's not right. That's what we are today. I'm so impressed by the two presentations we've already had. What incredible dedication and work. And thank you everyone for being here, whether you're a NICU parent, a physician, a nurse, or just someone else who supports the quiet and powerful work of infant feeding. Today, I'm not going to start with data. I'm actually going to start with a story. And imagine this baby. So this is a very preterm baby about to have their isolate closed. And of course, as a neonatologist, I know that they need some positive pressure, but they're also waiting for other things too. Their lungs are just learning this new rhythm of breathing air. Their gut is very quiet and waiting. Their immune system is right on the edge, just listening for what comes next. They're not just hungry to be fed. They're hungry for guidance. So now imagine we offer them just a couple words: protein, fat, sugar. It's enough to keep them alive, but it's like overhearing a conversation in the hallway. 20 cc's of NS. It's urgent, but it doesn't have context or meaning. So it has no signal of what to tolerate, no cue for growth, no whisper that, hey, you're not alone. You're safe now. But what if instead of those 3 words, we gave them a fluent message, something that was like, coat this piece of intestine right here, turn down that inflammation, feed this bacteria, not that one. This is what human milk can do. These aren't just poetic ideas. These are molecular instructions. Human milk doesn't just nourish, it negotiates. Formula offers nutrients, but milk delivers meaning. And that's what we're going to explore today: how milk speaks and how we can start listening. There's no better time to tune our ears into human milk's message. than World Breastfeeding Week, which is not just a time for celebration, but also a time for reckoning. I'd like to dedicate this talk today to Maya and Ariana. Ariana was born to Maya at 27 weeks, weighing 630 grams via an emergency C-section due to preeclampsia. I'd also like to acknowledge the people native to my homeland, where I'm standing today, of the Takanwa, Comanche, Kiowa, Wichita, and Caddo peoples, all in North Texas. This talk is dedicated to them and to Maya and Aria to acknowledge their trauma, their grief, and their resilience. For all of medical history, most of it so far, and even today, milk's been talked about as if it was food. It's long been reduced to nutrients and volume, but the real poverty is that we have not been listening. Calories, fat, proteins, and some micronutrients, that's the vocabulary we use to describe it. And that's important, but it's not complete. What we know is that milk is not just nutrition, it's information. It's filled with bioactive compounds, immune signals, developmental cues, even microRNAs that influence gene expression. It means we've been missing something profound. Milk doesn't just feed the baby, it instructs the baby. And when you encounter something that behaves like language, that's contextual, that adapts, and is full of nuance, you need to learn how to read it. That's where this quote comes in. To have another language is to possess a second soul. Learning the language of human milk gives us access to a second layer of meaning, a second soul within infant care. It's like discovering the Rosetta Stone stored in the NICU fridge, or in the freezer, rather. We've had this complex message system in our care all along, and we're just now learning to translate it. So if milk is a language, then its molecules are the alphabet, and each one carries meaning. My favorite secretory IgA, which is, I always like to talk about that one first, because it's more than an antibody, it's an instructor. It coats mucosal surfaces, the lung, the gut, the eye, and teaches the immune system what to tolerate, what to fight, when to stay balanced. And for the first few months of life, human milk is the only source of secretory IgA passing into the infant. And it's also still present in donor milk and donor milk-derived fortifiers. Next is lactoferrin. Lactoferrin binds iron, starving harmful bacteria while nourishing tissues. It's also anti-inflammatory and antiviral. There are, of course, cytokines, these tiny little molecules of regulation that regulate both healing and inflammation. And then microRNAs, or extracellular vesicles, which is what it houses the microRNA. These are amazing. We're just now learning what these things do, but they fine-tune gene expression, like whispering editors that are shaping the developmental script all along the way. And then, of course, human milk oligosaccharides. They feed not the baby, but the microbiome, so the beneficial bacteria in the intestine. They act as prebiotics and as decoys, blocking pathogens and supporting the brain-gut signaling. One mother could produce over 200 distinct human milk oligosaccharides. These components don't just nourish, they inform. The infant doesn't just absorb this alphabet, they read it. And through it, they began to understand the world. We often talk about milk in terms of nutrients and what's in it, but the milk isn't just content, it's conversation. It has syntax, it has a structured order of bioactive components and interactions that guide how the body absorbs, interprets, and acts on these signals. It adapts, responds to gestational age, responds to mom's exposures, responds to inflammation, and even changes the microbiome, tailoring its message in real time when you get to have direct feeding at the breast. It has feedback from the infant with that direct breastfeeding via saliva, via latch, via suckling pattern. And importantly, these messages aren't just present, they're fragile. Processing methods and separation, like freezing, pooling, and adding some fortifiers, can distort or even silence these messages. Conversely, some interventions actually amplify them, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. What outcomes change when we stop treating milk as language, when we just ignore all of these aspects? We're not really listening, and I'll expand on that in just a moment. So what exactly is milk saying? There are, of course, a whole symphony of messages here. But the three main themes we're going to focus on today are protection, repair, and adaptation. First, milk says, you are not alone. Molecules like lactoferrin and secretory IgA offer immune defense and targeted education in both the innate and adaptive immune systems. Second, repair. Anti-inflammatory cytokines and growth factors help the infant recover from stress and infection. The milk says, it's time to rebuild. We're healing now. And third, adaptation. Again, secretory IgA, microRNAs, and HMOs help train the immune system to tolerate the self, the parent, and the microbiome, preventing allergies and autoimmunity many years later. So milk doesn't just nourish, it instructs. And when we undervalue lactation, we don't just lose nutrients, we lose guidance, healing, and the infant's right to biological communication. So what else? If milk is a language, then each parent speaks with their own dialect. So this is one of the first pieces of data that I'm going to show you. So each mom has their own dialect. It's shaped by their body, their immune history, and their baby's needs. Thanks to special new investigational tools, such as that used in this study by Smith et al., they're able to develop something called pediatric organoids, which are tiny models grown from tissue. So we can see how these dialects are received in a model of a type of organ. Organoids that were fed three things in this 2025 study: either raw milk from NICU parents, pasteurized donor milk, or infant formula. And the results were actually really striking. Organoids fed raw milk activated genes for gut protection, tissue repair, and immune balance. Genes like REG3, 3A, CLDN3, and ALPI, alkaline phosphatase, intestinal alkaline phosphatase. Now, pasteurized milk actually did show some of these effects, but they were kind of muted. Formula, however, how did those organoids do? They had minimal activation. They also had a concerning rise in other genes like DUOX2, which can trigger inflammation when it's not balanced by things like intestinal alkaline phosphatase. So it's not just that formula lacks the message, it may be sending the wrong message. This challenges us to look beyond calories and weight gain. We must ask, is the gut being trained? Is the inflammation decreasing? Is the immune system showing the baby how to tolerate things that are nourishing? Because when we feed a baby, we're not just filling the belly, we're shaping how their body responds to the world. And parents who want to breastfeed and provide breast milk but are unsupported don't just get silence. They get a substitute that may actively harm this fragile biology. That's not choice. That's failure by design. So we talked about milk as a form of communication, one that helps guide development, shape immunity, and calibrate the microbiome. But what happens when that message is muted? At the top of the hierarchy, of course, is direct breastfeeding, as I and others have mentioned. This is the most fluid form of this language. It's personalized, it's dynamic, and responsive to real-time cues like stress and illness and even saliva. This feeding activates protective generative genes, as I mentioned in the last slide. This supports growth, mucosal defense, and recovery from injury. Now, expressed milk does lose a little bit of that message. Mostly it loses the feedback part. So it's still the parent's own milk, but it does not have that live real-time feedback. The content, however, is rich in immune and developmental messages, just slightly less responsive to the moment to moment. The grammar is intact, even if the tone is a little bit softened. Now, donor milk, of course, is pasteurized for safety. And while some bioactive components are reduced, it still carries meaningful signals, HMOs and secretory IgA, as well as other protective nutrients. It has a shared dialect, a shared human milk language. Even though it's less personalized, it's still human. And of course, at the base of this hierarchy is formula. It does serve its purpose. It meets caloric needs, but it lacks the adaptive nature of of directly breastfeeding and the bioactive complexity of expressed and donor breast milk. While milk communicates and calibrates, formula is pretty static. There's not a lot of difference from feed to feed or from day to night. But as we saw in the previous data, this may not be biologically neutral. Sometimes triggering gene pathways associated with inflammation and stress without those balancing signals can actually potentially harm the infant. So as we shift that question, not just what's in the milk, but how intact is the message? How much of the signal is delivered to the infant? The good news, there are some interventions that help preserve or even amplify this message. Human milk-derived fortifiers or donor milk-derived fortifiers, according to recent studies by Philip and Tamar, which I'll expand on in the next slide, appear to enhance immune modulating activity when added to expressed breast milk and donor milk samples. This is not about judgment, it's about fluency and ensuring that whenever possible, milk's message gets through. So we must ask, what happens when we alter the message with fortification? The aim of fortification, of course, for preterm infants is to add calories, protein, calcium, and phosphorus, essentially, as well as a few other nutrients. But is that enough? Does the origin of the fortify matters? The evidence differs, and the things that we measure have not all been unified. So Dr. Prakesh was able to highlight his important work from the Canadian Neonatal Network, showing, again, the superiority of parents' own milk over donor milk formula or not feeding at all. Dr. Unger may share some of the important work that she has done, which shows that parents' own milk has the most profound effect on the microbiome. And importantly, human milk-derived fortifier, when it was added, did not change the microbiome. That's perhaps reassuring, given some concern that this fortifier may dilute mother's milk. But the volume isn't the only lens we should consider. We should ask, does fortification preserve or interfere with milk's native bioactivity? Now, the studies by Philip and Tamar on the right of this slide have found a few of those answers. They found that human milk-derived fortifier can actually amplify the immune and regenerative markers, especially in frozen and previously handled milk. It may help restore that message. In contrast, the bovine-derived fortifiers they investigated, even in small volumes, have been linked to reduced bioactivity and immune modulation. So while volume is easy to measure, compatibility may matter more. Human milk-derived fortifier doesn't replace parents' milk. It reinforces and amplifies the language and the message that it's attempting to send. So we've explored how milk communicates, but what happens when we truly listen? And we actually have just heard some great presentations about what happens when you can actually listen to and highlight that change in the language and the words we use to parents at the bedside. We begin to see milk not just as food, but as therapy. Colostrum, as we've just learned, is the first immune lesson. It coats the mucosa, it trains the intestine, it calms inflammation, it delivers the highest dose of secretory IgA by concentration of any mammal. And this evolutionary investment apparently has paid off because it's been there for millennia. And that's just the start. Milk speaks in molecules like intestinal alkaline phosphatase for epithelial protection, LGR5 for renewal, and Reg3A for healing. These aren't just nutrients, they're prescriptions, especially for preterm infants. Even pasteurized donor milk still whispers these messages. So clinical fluency means that we treat milk with reverence, holding colostrum with intention, feeding it at small volumes, as we heard in the last presentation, can be a really powerful intervention, and valuing lactation work like any other critical care, not because milk is sacred, but because it's specific, it's potent. And to the labor of human milk. I was myself a milk donor. I breastfed my 4 kids for a total of 74 months during my lactation lifetime. So I do understand the work of lactation. So if milk is a message, then lactation is the labor of composing that message. And like many forms of labor, especially those by women and birthing people, it's often invisible in clinical care. Milk isn't just secreted, it's summoned. By biology, yes, but also by rest, proximity, stress, support, and it's built from interrupted sleep, emotional energy, and constant vigilance. Every feeding, every ounce, every decision to try again is labor. Lactation isn't a side note in care, it is care. And care demands effort, sacrifice, and systems that protect it. As Wilson et al. In this publication remind us, breastfeeding equity means addressing structural barriers like access, bias, and opportunity costs that fall hardest on marginalized families. And some give this donated milk through grief. Bereaved donors offer not just nourishment, but meaning. Their milk carries immunologic power and a profound message of love and connection to the community. To protect milk is to protect makers, its sharers, and those who give through grief as well. Because there's no signal without a sender, no sender without labor. So then we have to ask, what happens when no one is listening? Milk literacy clinically and culturally reduces it to just calories. We track milliliters, not meaning. We time feeds, but we don't ask if the immune training has been started. In the NICU, that looks like colostrum left unused, donor milk treated as optional, lactation support offered only if someone asks, and maybe only during the day, Monday through Friday. When we ignore milk's informational code, we miss chances to shape development, reduce inflammation, and support immunity. Formula can feed, but it doesn't instruct, it doesn't adapt, it doesn't say, your mother is still protecting you. This isn't a critique of parents who choose formula. It's a critique of systems that treat milk as optional and fail to fund the support it requires. Illiteracy in any language is a barrier. In the NICU, milk illiteracy can mean the difference between healing and harm. The good news, we can learn. And once we're literate, we're accountable for protecting, translating, and amplifying milk's message that it's trying to send. We're almost done here. As we began this talk, we started with a simple idea of milk as message, a biologically rich form of communication. And throughout this conversation, we've seen how fragile that message can be. We've seen some studies that remind us that not all milk experiences are equal, and not all interventions are neutral. Processing, fortification, and formula feeding each influence how clearly the message is delivered or distorted. But here's what's powerful. When we learn to interpret the message, we become better stewards of it. That's what milk literacy means, not just knowing the nutritional value of milk, but understanding its immunologic fluency, its molecular vocabulary, and therapeutic cadence. When we become literate in milk's language, we can act more intentionally. We can design care plans like that Mariana outlined so beautifully. We can protect and amplify that message, especially for the most vulnerable. And most importantly, we can move beyond the binary, the artificial binary of breastfeed or not. We recognize the layered ways that milk can heal, support, and adapt. That includes honoring the contributions of donor milk, understanding how to fortify wisely, and creating space for milk-informed decision-making, much like their multidisciplinary rounds. Milk is not just a fluid, it's an instruction manual. And our role, whether we're parents, nurses, dietitians, researchers, physicians, is to ensure that these instructions are received as clearly as possible. So how do we shift to recognizing it as a form of care? Everything we've discussed, bioactivity, signal strength, fortification, comes down to literacy. Not reading words, but interpreting biology. For parents, especially those still navigating and recovering from their time in the NICU, trust that your milk speaks. And your baby knows what it's saying, even if no one else has translated it for you. For clinicians, protect lactation as a clinical intervention, not a lifestyle. Supporting milk production and delivery is immune care, it's developmental care, and it's family support care. For milk banks and researchers, center dignity. Acknowledge that donating milk carries meaning, even when you are paid to do so, not just nutrition. Honor both the science and the story behind every sample. And for all of us, advocate for systems that embed milk literacy into daily clinical practice. This means protocols that treat colostrum like medication, documentation that reflects lactation work, policies that don't just count calories, but count communication as well. When we listen, we protect. And when we protect, we change outcomes. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate your time. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Wow, Dr. Hamilton Spence, I am in tears here because it was such a beautiful, touching presentation, a different way of telling the importance of breast milk and what it does to parents and babies. Like, it's so beautiful, incredibly beautiful, and I'm so grateful that you accept our invitation to speak on this special World Breastfeeding Week and really shine a different light into the conversation. So thank you for that. So we have a few questions for you. Start with Barb here.
Yes.
How about the frozen mom? Is this milk somewhat muted?
Yes, it is. So what it loses, of course, is live cells. These live cells, their stem cells, are actually in direct breastfed milk, even in unrefrigerated milk, to be honest. So if you can get the milk fed not from directly breastfeeding, but from freshly expressed milk that has not yet been refrigerated, then you actually have those live cells. Once it's refrigerated, you lose live cells, and the immunologic value starts to slowly diminish. So when there is a need for freezing the milk, yes, there is a further diminishment of the immune signal and the developmental signal. So at each point along the way that you move from direct breastfeeding, which is of course not possible for our very preterm infants and other sick infants in the NICU, if you can prioritize within your system the feeding of freshly expressed milk that is less than 4 hours of age or 4 hours from expression, you will get that optimal signal delivery, including live stem cells. So yes, frozen milk also does have some diminishment of the signal as well.
Thank you. We have a question from Sandy. She's joining us from Taiwan. Okay, sorry, this is a follow-up question. First question, does the donor milk and express breastfeeding milk have a difference? And then she says, some moms doesn't produce enough milk or no breast milk. What do you suggest?
Yeah.
So let's start with those, and then she has a third question here.
Okay, and the first one is?
First, milk, donor milk and express breast milk.
Yes.
Difference.
Yes, yeah, there certainly is a diminished signal in donor milk, but it's still that complex, nuanced language that includes a developmental signal that's just reduced. So there is secretory IgA, but it's not personalized, right? So it's not the mom getting exposed to the things that the baby is exposed to and then generating her own prescriptive secretory IgA to fight off the things that they are specifically fighting. There is a secretory IgA that is from another donor that is still active and can actually fight infection and bind to things like group B strep and E. coli, but they are diminished. So if there's a full amount of secretory IgA in freshly expressed milk and direct breastfeeding, that is reduced by at least 30% in donor milk. The number actually differs based on the study, but in general, I think of it, the secretory IgA in donor milk as somewhere between 50 and 70% of that in mother's milk, of freshly expressed mother's milk. So yes, it is somewhat diminished. Specifically, I know some numbers about secretory IgA. Of course, there are other things that are lost. Lysozyme is completely lost in the freezing of mother's milk. There are other intricate words and notes there that will fall out, that are not anymore part of the message after freezing. So definitely freshly expressed mother's milk and direct breastfeeding are the highest fidelity of communication to the infant. No question.
Wonderful. And the follow-up question, some mothers don't produce enough or no breast milk. What do you suggest?
Yeah, so this varies, of course, throughout the world. Thank you for tuning in from Taiwan. That's a real compliment. I'm delighted to hear your question. I would say in the US, our practice at this time is for very low birth weight infants. Their donor milk is our supplement of choice. So when they are less than 1,500 grams, generally until they're about 32 to 33 weeks, some are a little bit older, more like 35 weeks, we automatically supplement mother's milk with donor milk. I do really like the approach that Mariana shared, especially in a place where you may not have access to donor milk early for these critically ill infants. And that high priority on colostrum as immune therapy is a very effective way to get the most you can out of what you have. When you do have donor milk as an option to supplement, it is the second best thing.
Yeah, and I love that you said we should shift the way you see colostrum and see colostrum as a medication. This is such a key message, and we're going to certainly keep sharing this on our social media. So it's always in people's radar because it's such an important message.
Yeah.
So one last question from Sandy. We have not addressed neck, but she has a question. Does the donor breast milk and express breast milk prevent neck difference?
Yes. So again, you get the biggest effect of protection against necrotizing enterocolitis from parents' own milk, freshly expressed, or frozen and thawed. There is a protective effect against necrotizing enterocolitis from donor milk. The data is pretty clear about that. As we've learned, really, donor milk is one of those things that is really, Brazil has definitely been a world leader on that stage to show us how to build systems around that support. And it's really a new tool that's only been around essentially for 15 years in the US. So we are still learning the best ways to use donor milk. There is some protection with neck based on the data, the world stage data, that donor milk can protect against neck, not as strongly as parents' own milk does, but it is superior to preterm formula for neck protection indeed.
Thank you so much. I will just share with you, I did pump for my son for 8 months, 5 months in the NICU, 3 months is still coming home. And I was able to breastfeed him for full 2 years. And I love that you said this is a labor and it is a labor of love. And I think it's an important message for all the parents listen to us today, that we see you, we acknowledge how hard that is, but rest assured that we are doing the best for our babies by providing breast milk, human milk. So Dr. Hamilton Spence, thank you so much for being with us today. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Fabiana.
To get inspired by what you shared with us. I'm very grateful.
Thank you so much.
And I also want to share with all live audience today that we do have a lot of educational materials. I'm going to share the link here for our website page. We have infographics, we have booklets, we have a podcast to really help healthcare providers to support families in the NICU in their breastfeeding and pumping journey. And we have our last speaker today, Dr. Sharon Unger. I have a pre-recorded session with her, and she's going to talk about the human milk microbiome. The human milk microbiome is a critical element in maintaining health, with functions ranging from immune protection to nutrient digestion and even brain development. Preterm infants are at risk for disturbances in the development of their microbiome. This talk will focus on how human milk impacts the development of the early microbiome. Dr. Unger is from New Brunswick and graduated from the House University Medical School. After a long time as a neonatologist at Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto, she has returned to her roots in the Maritimes and is now working at the IWK Health Science Center in Halifax. She is additionally the medical director for the Rogers-Hickson Ontario Human Milk Bank and the co-primary investigator of the Maximum study, which is the Maximizing Mother's Milk program of research in early childhood nutrition. So I'm going to share with you Dr. Unger presentation. Dr. Unger, thank you so much for joining us here today to celebrate this World Breastfeeding Week. We are very grateful to have you here with us.
It is such an honor to be with you. Thank you so much for the invitation, particularly during World Breastfeeding Week. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful. And I know you have a presentation to share with us, which is a topic that many of us are very curious to learn about. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. My talk is entitled Mother's Milk Microbiome for Preterm Infants. The objectives that I would like to review for today are the role of the human microbiome, how the development of the microbiome might be altered in preterm infants, and the importance of the microbiome in human milk in the development of the preterm infant's microbiome. And the drawing on the left is from one of my children. I always like to start with a little personal story, which is how I developed my interest in human milk. And on the right-hand side is my mother, and she was born 86 years ago as a quite preterm infant and was not expected to make it. In the center photograph is my grandmother, and the baby was kept at home in those days and fed express breast milk in an eyedropper, and she thrived. So now on to the current topic, and to begin with a little bit of terminology. First of all, to say that by microbes, I mean all bacteria, viruses, and fungi. And then the term microbiome is used when speaking about all of those organisms in a particular environment and including all of their genetic or inherited material. And this time the picture is one from another one of my children. To begin with, I think the microbiome is really quite interesting. Human beings have more microbes on them and in them than their own human cells. And the genes of that microbiome is 100 times more genes in the microbes themselves than in the human being. So, for example, the human microbiome genes are about 2 million genes, or the genetic material, whereas our own human genes are in and around 20,000 genes. And the thinking is that the microbiome has many, many, many important functions. And therefore, if a microbe has an error in one of their genes, it's not so critical because there are so many microbes to take over that function. Whereas in human beings, if we lose the function of one of our genes, it can be quite impactful. So what are the functions of the microbiome then? Well, most commonly we think about immune protection, and that it's very important for babies to be colonized with all of those healthy bacteria and other microbes, and that those protect babies from harmful bacteria. In addition, digestion is a very important role of the microbiome, and in particular for the preterm baby, because preterm babies have an immaturity of all of the lining of their bowel and are less able to digest complex materials. And so the digestion actually is begun vitamin K. And what I really want to focus on right now is how when a baby is born, they develop a microbiome within their body. And in particular, I want to focus on the microbiome in the gut and how this has an impact on their brain development. This is a complicated slide. It is difficult for me to understand, but there is a connection between the brain and the bowels, which is shown here in the center. There's a long nerve called the vagus nerve that connects the brain to the bowels. And you can see there are many, many bacteria that are within the bowel. And these bacteria have many functions, including, for example, they can make neurotransmitters, which are molecules that allow nerves to signal one another. For example, many people have heard of serotonin or dopamine. These can be impacted by the microbes in your gut and communicate with the vagus nerve and thereby impact the developing brain. What you can see in the top right-hand part of this picture is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is a part of the brain that is important in regulating stress responses. So very important in the preterm baby, and is also impacted by the developing microbiome. So many, many functions of the microbes in the bowel. And just to get into a little bit more detail about how that microbiome develops. Of course, we have microbes everywhere on and in our body, but I'm focusing mainly on the microbiome in the gastrointestinal tract, in the gut. And it matures in a stepwise fashion over the first 1,000 days after an infant is born. After those 1,000 days, it's relatively stable. The bacteria and viruses and other microbes that you acquire in the first 1,000 days are then pretty consistent for the remainder of your life. The first month after birth, the bacteria that a baby develops are largely influenced by the mode of delivery. That is, whether the baby was born vaginally or by cesarean section, can have a very different microbiome. And then in months 1 to 6, the most important factor in the microbiome development is how the baby is fed. And of course, whether they receive human milk or not is highly influential in that second phase of development. And then how this can be altered if you're born preterm. Well, starting up in the top left-hand corner, the NICU environment is very different than a baby who is born and goes to their own home environment, where NICUs are largely a sterile environment within an isolate, but there may be pathogenic or harmful organisms within the environment as well. Whether the baby is preterm or term, even within the NICU will make a big difference. Many of our babies are exposed to antibiotics, and those are out of necessity. We do worry about preterm babies being at risk for infection, and we really must use antibiotics, but we must use them judiciously because they do impact the developing microbiome. I mentioned the mode of delivery. Next is an IV bag of fluid, because often we do start feeding babies with nutrition that is provided intravenously at the same time as we start providing milk, often in a feeding tube, and we advance the feeds that are given directly to the baby in a feeding tube. We advance those slowly, and that will impact the development of the microbiome for the baby who is in the NICU. And I'll come into more details on what you see in the bottom left-hand corner, but the most important factors for the baby to develop a healthy microbiome are, first of all, the skin-to-skin contact time. I can't emphasize enough how important it is for babies to be held and to be receiving all of those beneficial microbes from their parent, as well as human milk. And human milk delivers both many microbes. Human milk is really teeming in microbes, and that's providing the baby many healthy microbes. But also there are many molecules in human milk that are there to promote the development of the microbiome as well. And then human milk itself can be impacted by the parent's diet, for example. So having a healthy diet, which we know is particularly difficult in a hospital setting, is really important for the development of the milk microbiome that the baby receives, and is thus key in developing the baby's own microbiome in that direction. So the components that are in the mother's milk that will influence the baby's gut microbiome development, well, there are many components of human milk, and these change over time. So mother and baby have a specific milk that is for that pair, and it changes over time so that it's meeting the needs of the baby. As I mentioned, there are many bacteria in human milk. Also, on the top right-hand side, you'll see there are many oligosaccharides in human milk. These are prebiotics. Prebiotics are what feed the bacteria in the milk. What keep the bacteria healthy are oligosaccharides. Oligosaccharides are small molecules, small sugars, and they're actually not digested or absorbed by the baby, but they're very abundant in human milk, and we hypothesize that they're there in order to promote the microbiome. So therefore, mother's milk has a healthy prebiotic as well as probiotic, which is the major influence on the development of the baby's microbiome, particularly in that month 1 to 6. How come human milk has so many bacteria in it? Well, the bacteria come from many places. In this picture, you can see on the left-hand side is a woman during pregnancy, and there's actually bacteria that come from her gut and go directly into the mammary gland. And so human milk is not sterile. There are bacteria coming from the mother's bowel into the mammary gland to be provided to the baby. You can also see in that diagram that there are bacteria coming from her mouth, and they're coming from inside her body, from in her mouth, into the mammary gland, into her milk. You can see the mother on the right-hand side putting a baby to breast. There are many back and forth mechanisms for bacteria to be exchanged between a baby and their mother. So the baby begins to develop their microbiome in their mouth. And when a baby is on the breast, they're receiving bacteria from the milk and from the skin, but then the bacteria that are in the baby's mouth actually backwash into the mother's breast. And so there's a back and forth exchange of bacteria that continues throughout the time that a baby is being put to the breast. And this way, the microbiome can be quite responsive between a mother and her infant who's going to the breast. This is a study by Dr. Lauren LeMay, who was a PhD student who worked with Dr. O'Connor in Toronto and myself. And she had several milk samples that came from mothers of term infants, but these were mothers who were at risk of gestational diabetes. And she looked at the development of bacteria in the mother's milk. And what she found out that the development of the microbiome in the mother's milk was positively impacted by whether the mother provided exclusive human milk feeding, the number of times that the baby was put directly to the breast. And here again comes the importance of the mother's diet. So a mother's diet that is high in fiber from grains and polyunsaturated fats enhanced the microbiome in her milk. This is another study that comes from Dr. O'Connor's group in Toronto that I was a part of, and it's called Nutrient Enrichment of Human Milk with Human and Bovine Milk-Based Fortifiers. And I'll just tell you the very highlights of this study, because what I want to get into is the microbiome part of it. What the study was called is the Optimum, or Optimizing Mother's Milk Study. And we compared the feeding tolerance for babies who were fed first mother's milk, and they were supplemented with donor milk if there wasn't a sufficient volume of their own mother's milk. And then the babies were randomized to receive a fortifier, or it's a supplement that we give routinely to all preterm babies. And that fortifier could be based from a cow's milk product or a human donor milk product. Those were the two different types of fortifier that a baby was randomized to. And these are the characteristics for the babies who were in the study. There were 127 babies in total. In the left-hand column are the babies who were fed the cow's milk-based fortifier, and on the right are the babies who were fed the human milk-based fortifier. And what you can see here is that they were pretty small babies, weighing about 900 grams at birth in both groups, and being born just over 27 weeks gestation. And here are the results of the feeding tolerance. There wasn't any difference between the two groups. Again, bovine-based fortifiers on the left, human milk-based fortifier on the right, and about a third of babies in both groups had an interruption in their feeding at some point during their hospitalization. And we define this by the feed volume being reduced by at least 50% for at least 12 hours. This is really, really common in preterm babies. This is Dr. Katie Hopperton, who was a postdoctoral student who worked with us, and she looked at the long-term neurocognitive outcomes for the children who participated in this study, and there were no differences at 18 months corrected age when we looked at the outcomes on cognitive scores, language scores, and motor scores. Really, the children were doing quite well and quite equally between the two groups. So, as I mentioned, what I really wanted to get into was what we looked at in the microbiome for the babies who participated in this study. You can see that the children were participated in the study for about 8 weeks, and each week we collected a sample of mother's milk as well as a sample of the baby's stool. And the baby's stool, we did a DNA analysis or a genetic analysis to look at all of the microbes that were present in the baby's stool, thus representing the baby's microbiome development. And these are the results. They were published by Dr. Michelle Asbury, who's also completed her PhD in this project. And I'll direct you to the green box, which are the results for the babies who received the human milk-based fortifier. And they had less microbial diversity in their stool. And usually diversity is thought of as a good thing. The more different types of bacteria that you have in your microbiome, generally thought to be healthier. And on the right-hand side In the brown box are the results for the babies who received the cow's milk-based fortifier, and they had more diversity and more density in their microbiome. So our conclusions from this study were that the gastrointestinal microbiome of infants who were born less than 1,250 grams is responsive to feeding human milk that is enriched with different types of fortifiers. From the microbiome perspective, there wasn't evidence of a benefit of one fortifier over the other. But what we hypothesize is most important is the dose of the mother's milk that the baby receives during the time that they're in hospital. And here I'm pointing out the difference in dose of mother's milk. So, for example, when the healthcare team orders 100 milliliters of mother's milk to be to be prepared for a preterm baby, and they ask for fortifier to be added. At the time of this study, we were using a powdered-based fortifier, and that time it would displace about 3 milliliters of mother's milk, whereas the liquid human milk-based fortifier displaced 10 times that amount. The difference is not quite so significant any longer, as some of the newer fortifiers are liquid-based and are a larger volume. But you can see there was a significant difference in the mother's milk volume that the babies received. So then to look at what were the important characteristics in the milk itself, in the microbiome developing in the milk. And in the left-hand side, you will see that we studied the mother's BMI, the delivery mode, and the antibiotics that the mother received. And what you see are the outcomes on the right-hand side. And in the purple are all of the microbes. And then they're divided out in the blue by the mother's BMI, in the orange by the mode of delivery, and in the green by whether the mother received antibiotics or not. And the light green is no antibiotics for the mother, and the dark green is antibiotic use. And you can see that there are many, many more microbes present in the mothers who did not receive antibiotics. And that is over an 8-week duration. So it appears that mothers even receiving brief periods of antibiotics can have a significant impact on the microbiome that is in their milk for a prolonged period of time. And then finally, we wanted to see how this milk would impact the development of the microbiome in the baby's gut. So we looked at all of those bacteria in the milk and multiplied it by the volume of milk that the baby received, and then the outcome of their stool results. And at this time, Sarah Sharma is a PhD student who has joined the study and who wrote this publication. And in the top graphs, you see in the gray lines, the microbes in mother's milk go down over time. As in the bottom lighter line, you see that the microbes in the baby's stool go up in time. And what I really want to point out is that we looked at many different factors that associated the mother's milk microbes with the infant's stool microbiome. And the most important thing is the graph that is on the far right, which is whether the baby was fed at the breast. And so on the top, the more green color line is babies who fed at the breast, and on the bottom are babies who did not feed at the breast. And there was a significantly higher impact of the mother's milk microbiome for babies who went actually directly to the breast. So my concluding slide is that a healthy maternal diet is likely quite important, although recognizably can be difficult when mothers are spending long days in hospital. There is a significant, and we must recognize the impact of antibiotics on both the mother and the baby. that the volume of mother's milk fed to a baby is quite important, and that early feeding at the breast is also very impactful. And finally, I just wanted to thank all of the students who participated in this research. These are some, but not all. And I wanted to thank you and see if there are any questions.
Dr. Enger, thank you so much for your presentation. I always learn so much from you. It's amazing how far the research has gone since the time I joined one of your first studies at Sinai in 2012, the Domino study, showing the pasteurization process.
The very first study you joined, and that was the study that led us to launching the milk bank in Ontario.
That's amazing. So, questions for you. I think you talk about early feeding at the breast, and of course, our babies when they're born extremely preterm, it's going to be many weeks or sometimes months until they can actually go on the breast. And then NICU, there is always this conversation: do you do fresh milk versus frozen milk to the baby? Because you talk about, those first few weeks, how the microbiome gets shaped. So, what is the approach now and the recommendation, fresh versus frozen milk?
Boy, you always go straight to the point and ask the important questions. I think that increasingly the NICUs are recognizing the importance of skin to skin, and it is for all parents. And for the lactating parent, I think it is important to be in the vicinity of the breast, even when the baby is too small to be directly transferring milk. It is important for the baby to be held skin to skin on the breast, near the breast, and just beginning to learn all that is about to come. We did do one little study where we looked at the difference in the microbiome of mothers pumping at home versus mothers pumping in the NICU. And what we saw is that there's many more skin organisms in milk from mothers who are pumping in the NICU. And I think that's quite important, that the mother is being exposed to those bacteria. She's providing those bacteria to the baby, also providing all of the antibodies to those bacteria. So there is something that evolves differently when you have a baby at the breast in the NICU and when you're pumping in the NICU, that I believe to be quite important. We don't quite know yet all of the details about feeding babies fresh versus frozen milk, but I think that's a really important consideration. I think it makes sense that when milk is pumped fresh at the bedside, that it can be provided for the oral immune therapy, or different words for it, but to provide drops of milk directly into the mouth that are fresh, and as well as being used for mouth care, so that the baby's mouth is being painted with all of those microbes. I don't have research numbers to tell you about it, but I can only begin to imagine the importance of those things. Once milk then is frozen and thawed and prepared, there is some loss of the microbiome, but there is still microbiome present. So I think that fresh is likely quite important and should be prioritized for mouth care and those kinds of things. And then for milk that is fed in the feeding tube. And then there are microbes present even following freezing and thawing and preparing. Having said that, there are no microbes that are left living in donor milk. And so donor milk is a great source of prebiotics, of those oligosaccharides that I was mentioning. So when there's some portion of the feed that is mother's milk and some portion that is donor milk, the donor milk is providing those prebiotics to the microbiome in the mother's milk. But there are no living cells left in donor milk. So the priority would be fresh mother's milk, frozen mother's milk, and donor milk third.
Absolutely.
That was a long answer.
It is a long answer, but it's a very important answer. So, but for the parents who are still new to the NICU, and we talk about oral immunotherapy, this is something they can do ongoing or just in the beginning at first admission to the NICU?
Oh, that's another great question. I highly encourage parents to talk to your healthcare team about oral immune therapy, about providing fresh drops of milk for your baby from the beginning and right up until the time that they're transferring milk from the breast.
Great. And you talk about antibiotics. And you know, as you mentioned, antibiotics, it cannot be avoided through a NICU stay, especially for babies who are born extremely preterm, who's going to have long NICU stays. How do you restore the microbiome in the babies when they go through all these treatments, life-saving treatment at that time?
I think skin to skin. And with both parents, if both parents are there, so skin to skin, mother's milk in that order, and then there is ongoing research. Although many units do and are able to provide probiotics to the very preterm babies as well, but I think the parents' microbiome first and foremost.
Let's talk about allergies, because talk about the microbiomes and everybody talks about allergies related to microbiome. Are our preterm babies more prone to allergies because of this interrupted microbiome, natural development of the microbiome, or there is no relation?
There may well be many, many impacts. I'm not aware that the literature is at that point yet. It has been studied in term children, the importance of the microbiome with respect to reducing asthma, with respect to reducing allergies, with respect to reducing things like metabolic syndrome, like reducing obesity and so on. There are many encouraging areas of research in the term child along those lines. I'm not aware that research is at that point yet in preterm children. And of course it must get there because our children are at even greater risk.
Right. So once the baby goes home from the NICU, what advice you have for parents to protect the microbiome, optimize, I guess, the function of the microbiome on their babies?
Well, there's evidence about not being too clean, about the importance of exposing your children to pets. Furry pets are good. So it's about the healthy diet. If the mother is providing her milk, then even more important for her to have a healthy diet. Once the baby begins to start taking solid foods, the importance of having the high fiber from grains diet for the child as well. But I think initially it's about playing on the floor, really, and not being, you have to transition from the sterile NICU environment to playing on the floor at home.
It's very difficult to switch, right? Because we always talk about make sure you protect this baby against respiratory viruses, don't expose your babies. And then, okay, but at the same time, we have to have some balance so the baby get exposed with caution. We always know that's so important for families, hand washing. But I totally hear you, because those are advice that grandparents used to give to new parents. Let the baby play and be dirty, and to build a good microbiome, even though they didn't use those specific words, but how to build their immune system.
Sometimes the grandparents were truly correct. Absolutely. Hand washing, so important, and making certain that people aren't coming in with a cough and a cold and a fever and immediately exposing the baby. So of course, in balance. But given all things, when all is well, playing down on the floor with animals around, and then having introducing a healthy diet.
Absolutely. Dr. Unger, thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm very grateful that you came and share your expertise. Your research is always wonderful to have your presence with us.
It's so much fun to be back with you. Thank you. Thank you.
And to all of you joining us live today, thank you for joining for this special episode of the Preemie Chat celebrating World Breastfeeding Week. And if you missed part of today's session or want to revisit some of those sessions, you can find this episode and all past episodes on our YouTube channel and website, which is the CanadianPreemies.org. While you're there, we explore the many resources and support options we offer to help families on their journey. And we have a lot of materials and information and educational materials on breastfeeding. And today I want to acknowledge our sponsor, Medela Canada, for supporting this episode of our Preemie Chat. We are very grateful for them to share the vision that we have to educate parents and healthcare providers on the importance of breast milk. And as a charitable organization, CPBF relies on the generous support of people like you. Your donations allow us to continue empowering families of premature babies every step of the way. Together, we can create a brighter future for all preemies and their families. And a quick reminder that on November 6th, we'll be hosting our very first fundraising gala in Toronto, and tickets are available also on our website, and will be a night that we can shine a light of hope for families and their babies. I hope many of you can join us for that special event. So thank you again for being part of this community, and we'll see you again next Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time for another live episode of the Preemie Chat. Stay well.